Welcome to the July 20th weekly JupyterLab call. Today we have 20 people, which is great. Oh, 21, as I said it, nice. In the chat, please find the link to the agenda and add your name if you wish. And add an agenda item if there's something you'd like to discuss that is on the order of 5 minutes or so. If there's something longer than that, please add it to the additional discussion section. It already looks like the discussion items, or rather the agenda items, are going to exceed 5 minutes, but hey, we'll do what we have to. All right, with that, why don't we get started? The first person on the agenda this week is Frederic.
Hey guys, yeah, sorry, lots of bullet points from my side. So the first one is easy. So I have 2 PR, and if somebody feels like having half an hour, something like that, to have a look, they are not too complex, so it would be much appreciated if somebody can review them. Especially the first one, because it would be nice to have it in the patch fix release I would like to do tomorrow for 3.4. Thanks, Darian. And it was it by student I'm monitoring on JupyterLab Git. Yeah, poor student, they need to use Windows. So yeah, the second bullet point is about a PR that was opened by a new new person on the project. The idea was to add some documentation about using tools for automation of setting up a development environment for JupyterLab. So the tools he is explaining is Vagrant. So as I wrote in the note, I'm not. I mean, I really appreciate the user sharing the code and the script he has done, and I would rather prefer people managing those kind of setup to be in a Git or in a separate GitHub repository rather than having it officially in our documentation, because I have always the impression that if it's in our documentation, then we need to maintain it and stuff like that. And we already, what was the name of the service, like the not GitLab, Gitbot setup was in our official documentation, but nobody was using it anymore, and so it was broken and stuff like that. So I would rather reply that thanks a lot, but please, if you update the doc, maybe just point to your Git or something like that. And I was wanting to have feedback of what others are thinking about that.
So I replied on the original issue, suggesting to indeed just link to the repo, because I think he did some good job setting up some example repo, and that would be enough. And maybe the pull request is a bit too elaborated, like you said, like there's maybe too much content there, and a link would be enough, I guess, right? And if the link becomes dead, then we would catch it with the CI and we could remove it in case they remove their repos. We could do that, like some kind of middle ground.
Go ahead, Jupyter.
So the main motivation for this, right, is to make it easy for people, like on sprints or whatever, to get quickly set up with a dev environment where you can use JupyterLab, right? And there is, of course, always some changes on that. So the advantage of taking it in to our repo, maybe if it was a separate page, if you think it's too much content, whatever, the advantage to take it in would be that once we change something about how you set up your build environment, ideally this would also be updated, right? And it wouldn't go out of date. And it's we who know how to set up the build environment, right? So I'm not saying I haven't considered it enough to say that I argue for keep putting it into the repo, but I'm saying that's the counter argument, right? So
Yeah, definitely. That's
I
the
don't know.
counter. Definitely the counter arguments. But I know that I'm kind of lazy by essence. So I know that if I'm not using the tools, then if the setup evolves, I will forget to update that part for sure.
Out of curiosity, since we have 24 people on the call who are at least somewhat interested in this sort of thing, could you do maybe a thumbs up or any emoji? Do you use Vagrant, or have you used Vagrant? Is it something you would use? Wow. That X means no, right? Yeah, okay, cool. I have used Vagrant. I think it's all right. I don't have a strong opinion though, and I certainly didn't have an opinion one way or the other, but this is interesting. Cool. What the person who opened this was trying to resolve was being a Windows user at a JupyterLab sprint. It's painful. And this was meant to be an answer to that.
VS Code with a Docker container is a better solution.
Yeah, that sounds modern.
It's like totally automatic, super easy.
Is it
You just need a Docker with enough stuff in it, like a sufficient dev environment for JupyterLab.
Okay.
We're not currently supplying that. We could.
So a Vagrant file and a Docker file doing this are kind of going to be very similar things, right?
Syntax-wise, I have no idea. I don't remember Vagrant syntax at all.
I don't remember if Vagrant file was special or not. I think I was writing just shell script in there, but sure thing. Okay, so
are y'all talking about new contributor experiences here?
So here's what
on
happened.
Windows, I guess.
Yeah, the context here is Vidar and I were at a sprint that we were hosting, and someone who had a Windows machine, a couple of people who had Windows machines, had difficulty getting a dev environment set up. And one person said, what if you had a VM that we could develop on? And that person happens to use Vagrant, so that was their solution to this. And we said, cool, open an issue, talk about it. And this is us talking about that issue.
Yeah, so
cool.
I would
one
say
of the
that
things, one of the things that has helped us with this is Gitpod. I'm not really like all that big on it personally, but like getting a dev environment set up and making PRs, that's been really successful in like quite a few big projects for us. And it kind of fits some of this architecture. So if you don't need to do it locally, Gitpod is an option.
Vidar?
So I would say that here was the contributor who came with the solution. If somebody else says we should use this other thing instead, I don't think it's fair on that contributor to say, hey, can you do this again with another tool? Either we should somebody else should give another option, or we should accept this contribution in some form or another. Then of course taking into account Frederick's question of can we make this smaller or somehow reduce the amount of
Blog post
shift
sound like
stuff
a good
around.
idea.
Nick?
You know me, I'll throw out, do it with Conda, works on Windows, doesn't need admin, doesn't need a virtual machine, doesn't need Docker. I don't think getting a working virtual machine system or Docker in front of someone on Windows that shows up as a workshop is making anything better.
I mean, I was running it and I was asking people to use Conda, and we still ran into issues. Like this didn't come out of not trying the easy route.
Not just use Conda, but actually build a full-on installer like an Anaconda or a Miniconda or a Mamba Forge that has exactly everything that you need already in it. I hand you this USB stick and it works offline. Of course, we can't have that because of NPM, right? Like,
Well,
we would need an actual package of all of our offline build chain, and that would be good. Yeah, I mean, I have empirical data that I was able to get an environment that complicated, plus the full browser environment, plus an automated acceptance testing environment, and got it working on, you know, 2 versions of Windows, 4 distros of Linux, and 2 different Mac versions from USB sticks in a workshop setting in under 20 minutes.
and how's the maintenance on that since then? How long does that keep? What's the shelf life?
The shelf life on that worked for that workshop, right? So it's what is the shelf life on the JupyterLab desktop? Because it uses exactly the same build mechanism for that, right? It's a construct.yaml that describes your requirements. It's just like an environment.yaml, and it just poops out installers at the other end.
Right, but the desktop installers is something that you as a distributor runs, right?
So is this. Yeah, you get
No, this is for people who want to do development locally of JupyterLab, right?
It's writing software is writing software. So yeah, I mean, you would get this installer, you would run it, and then on your, you know, 0 privileges Windows computer would have Git and the browser binaries that you needed, and Node.js of a specific version that actually worked, that wasn't, you know, crazy from the future or old and broken. You would have all the dependencies of JupyterLab. So you would not have Git clone, right? You would not have a clone of the JupyterLab repo, but you would have Git. So you'd have everything up to that point. So if the challenging thing is getting a working outer environment that you are running stuff into, because I don't even think we have like instructions on how to do it with virtualenv or pyenv or pipenv or poetry or, you know, the N,000 things, right? Yeah, I'm just saying it's an option. We have lots of experience doing it, and we've helped other people do that specifically for the use case of onboarding people quickly in a workshop setting.
Yeah, and any contributions that, you know, can do this is helpful.
So I think hey, we could probably talk about this a long time, and maybe we should time box it. But I think a solution that doesn't involve a large download, like a Gitpod solution, might be really good, although it does require good internet to use it persistently. Because another issue we often run into is everyone downloading all of the JupyterLab dependencies. If anyone has experience with one of the alternatives that has come up and feels like addressing this in a way that is easier to sustain going forward, and maybe something less niche than Vagrant, please contribute to this. Rick?
I was just going to ask, most of my development these days is either in the cloud or it's using Docker on my laptop, and it works fine. I mean, is there a JupyterLab development Docker container with this stuff preloaded?
No.
Should there be?
Yes.
That's where we're at right now. Yeah.
Yeah. So the question is, you know, I do this all the time on my own laptop. I mean, I'll take a look and see what my Docker file that I use looks like and put it back. But frankly, this should be more. My own view is that there should be a thing on Docker Hub that people who know a lot more than I do, which is virtually everybody on this call, has blessed.
I don't know, can your environment download and build JupyterLab?
Yeah, yeah.
That's all that really, like, I think that's a good PR right there.
Yeah. So, yeah, putting together a Docker container that builds JupyterLab would be or ideally has it pre-built, right? Well, I guess you do need to, if people are doing development on core, they need to pre-build this stuff, right?
Yeah, usually you would download a fresh repo, right?
Yeah. Well, see, that's a good question, right? Because should you? I mean, one of the issues that I have in doing builds when I'm working on my extension is you get package changes. Should this thing have package lock, where we guarantee this thing will build. The libraries may not be the most, and packages may not be the most up-to-date version, but on the other hand, they do work.
Yeah, no, I think that's fine.
Yeah, okay. I will contribute I'll disentangle the stuff we put in, and where should I put the Docker file for people to look at?
There's like a path that VS Code uses, right, for the Docker config goes. Maybe that.
Yeah, I'll start with that one. And maybe if there's somebody who would like to guide me on this, I'd really appreciate it. Because as said before, I don't know what I'm doing.
I mean, I could take a look. I'd be happy to review a PR.
Thanks, Max.
Okay, let's move to the next thing. Awesome. Thank you, guys.
Sorry for triggering a long discussion already.
No. It's worth that. No, because this is actually a really good one. Right?
Yeah.
Onboarding people is really important. So thanks.
So next point, but maybe Johan was wanting to say it because it's his work. So CodeMirror 6 has been merged in master. So it's a big change. We are not gonna release an alpha just right now. The idea is if people that are contributors could try already master branch, even on Binder, and try to report as much as possible. I've linked the issue that's listing follow-up things that are known right now. So feel free to add some observation that you are seeing and stuff like that, and so we can start bug fixing things. And the follow-up also on CodeMirror 6 is that it was planned to drop a code editor, so the phase 8, but that probably can move to discussion because that's gonna require some discussion. As I just mentioned, there is, for example, an aspect that CodeMirror 6 is no more using positioning with line and columns; it's using offset directly in absolute in a string and stuff like that. So that may require a bit more discussion for what do we do actually, when we drop code editor. So yeah, but we can move maybe that in discussion.
Okay, you can put some insights in the issue. All that.
Thanks, Johan.
This is a huge amount of work. We've talked about it a few times, but thank you. That's awesome. And everyone else who is even marginally curious, please take a look because it's a deep one. So we should find out all the things that are different, need addressing, any sort of edge cases that may have been missed, etc. I think one aspect of this is performance. One aspect of this is accessibility. There's a lot going on here. So thank you so much. Okay. Max, you are up next.
Been a little while. So I have a PR open for a longstanding UI improvement issue. Just to illustrate, I'm going to share my screen. Zoom will let me, which it does not. Okay, never mind. Everything's just like a warning sign. I don't see anything, so I'm going to assume that's never going to work. All right. So basically, the issue is that when a document or notebook is read-only, it's not necessarily immediately obvious. And so if you try to save, using the keyboard command, sort of nothing happens, and maybe miss what's going on. So there was a request from a long while back to make the read-only status of the document clear. So taking an initial stab at that based on some of Isabella's old UI designs. So the toolbar has changed a little bit since like 3 years ago when Isabella wrote up those designs, so I had to tweak some things. So I think what I'm going to ultimately do is make the save icon, the save button in the toolbar, which now gets just grayed out when a document is read-only. Give it like a more noticeable background and like a clear label saying like document is read-only or something. Just make it super obvious when that's going on. And as a follow-up to that work, I also want to add a system for toast notifications of some kind to JupyterLab, so that like when somebody tries to save, it can just pop up a toast, which can then kind of just unobtrusively fade away, not like ignoring or getting in neighbor's way. I think the best way to do this is probably to use toasters, some complicated components. Probably best to use some of the existing implementation. There's many good ones out there, so I just wanted to get, I guess, everyone's feedback, and, maybe yay, nay support on using one of these packages.
I am currently using the Material UI snack bar in Elira in a few locations. I'm a big fan of it. I'm a big fan of
Material UI in general.
Yeah, I've been planning on doing exactly what you're talking about, like adding a generic way of doing toast notifications in JupyterLab, and just haven't had the bandwidth to do it for like a year.
Well, somebody's paying me to do it, so I want to go ahead and do it.
I am definitely a very big fan of adding that.
So yeah, my top choice would be the Material UI one. And so the groups talked a lot back and forth over a long while about, should we add Material UI? Should we add, what was the other one? Blueprint. And so I think it's reasonable to add the Material UI toast here because at least at this point, theoretically, tree shaking has gotten good and consistent enough that it should only add instead of the whole 500K of the Material UI package, it should just add the 13K of the snack bar package, sub package. So if there's no strong objections, I'm gonna probably go ahead and do a PR based on that.
There's some hands, so let's see what people are thinking. Brian?
Sorry. Two things in terms of Material UI. The JupyterLab Council a few months ago took a vote to adopt Fast UI for our Leaf, React, and web components. And a lot of that was driven by the accessibility. I would say that my interpretation of that decision is that unless we take another vote to adopt something.
What if there's a missing component from Fast? If there's a toast component in Fast UI, I'll certainly use that instead. But.
One of the benefits so there's not a toast component. One of the benefits though is that Fast both offers, I would describe it as built-in components and tools for building components that are accessible. And so I think this is important enough that we just need to open an issue and discuss and make sense of this with respect to the previous decision.
So this is also an issue that has been proposed, I think. So the issue number on the original issue about toasts is below 1,000. So it was proposed, I think, 8 years ago or something. So this is an issue that's been brought up many, many times, I think, in the community and sort of gets stalled on like super easily. So I think the closest we can use to just using a ready-made solution, probably the more realistic, like getting anything done will be.
And then, and actually, I want to be clear. I think you're right to cast this as two separate decisions. One is what UI component should we use for the toast part. The other is the broader question of how we use that in a notification system. And a couple of people, Darian here, Andre, the Jupyter server group has been working on a broader effort around notifications in JupyterLab. And so Max, I would encourage you to plug into that. There's been a lot going on and there's other people that also have funding to work on that. So please coordinate.
Sure. I'd be happy to.
Fred?
I just want to mention for the read-only features, you are saying that you plan to tune the save button style. There are some questions about that.
I'm open to counter proposals.
No. It's just to mention that in the frame of RTC, that button may disappear in the sense that the saving will be automatically done on the server. So the save button by itself may not make sense.
Has RTC tackled read-only at this point?
No, I mean, it won't tackle read-only by essence, I think. It still need, I mean, that's just to bring the discussion about the design.
Well, I mean, so in that case, you could maybe just have like the banner without the button or something.
Yeah, so, or maybe we can also try to have some options and see on the issue what people think. I think it will be the best here.
Sure.
I'll just comment really quickly that I think the save button does make a lot of sense even with RTC, in my experience. It's just that like when one person saves, then the save button indicates that the file's been saved to disk for everybody. Like that information gets synced around, but it still makes a lot of sense having the button.
Yeah, MS OneNote, for example, maps Control S or Command S to sync. So even if things are normally auto-save periodically, if you hit the save button, you like force it, which I personally appreciate.
There's a difference between saving to disk and being sent to the backend.
Does RTC save on every chain?
It shouldn't, but I don't know.
Because otherwise the button does still make sense.
William, how often do you sync to disk?
It's configure. It's like there's an auto save configuration option that the user can configure, and it only saves to disk when you explicitly save or you hit the auto save timeout, or you just like close the tab, then it also saves to disk.
And what's your default auto save?
I think it's 30 seconds, something like that.
Okay. So user visible, like that's on a user time frame. It's not like every half second or something like that. Okay.
In sharp contrast, if you look at VS Code, it tries, or at least Code Server, I think it tries to save to disk as quickly as possible and very frequently. So it has a different model, but that's VS Code without real-time sync. I don't know what it's like with real-time sync. And the motivation is also like editing LaTeX documents where you might want something to happen on save to disk, or like other tools that watch the file system and do something when you save to disk, like do a build or kick off a format or something. So sorry.
No, sorry. I just, because it might get lost in the chat, I also, so the extension, Max, that Brian mentioned, the notifications one, is currently in the Jupyter Cal Poly org, but what it's using is the JupyterLab contrib, JupyterLab notifications, JupyterLab Hostify, which is a React component.
Okay. Yeah, I also put a link to that on the issue.
Oh, you did? Something like,
so
yeah,
let's keep the discussion there, I guess.
Cool. Okay.
Cool. That's awesome.
Okay. So any other thoughts or comments?
I will keep looking into and prototyping toasts, try and coordinate with everyone else while I do so.
Cool. So one thing to consider here is, there's been a few times now where we have actually put things to a vote, and this is new, so it's not actually familiar, I think, for any of us yet how to navigate around that. Like there's a vote that closed, and then discussion continued on that vote anyway recently, right? And this is another one of those cases where we had a lot of discussion about Fast UI versus other toolkits, and we eventually held a vote and arrived at a decision it's
the
not
decision for fast UI to the exclusion of everything else, or just more fast UI?
Well, the decision was to build a UI toolkit, and the underlying technology of the UI toolkit would be fast UI. So,
okay.
I'm not exactly sure, like, what the dynamics that around that sort of decision ought to be. And when somebody in good faith produces like some cool new functionality, but it's introducing a new dependency or different dependency than one we've sort of discussed and voted on, I'm not exactly sure how to handle it. But in this particular case, because we're only talking about a specific widget, let's find out if it's there, and if it's not, let's find out how hard it is to add it with that paradigm. I would say.
So I think so far my opinion is it would be moderately hard to add it, and it makes sense. It's complicated enough. It makes sense to use somebody else's existing thing rather than trying to reinvent our own wheel.
Sure, but having a wheel that is of different material than the rest of the car would be weird.
Yeah, sure, I can see that too. So yeah, I'd like to just look into it and see,
cool.
A, what progress has already been made on those components you pointed out, and B, what exists in fast UI that would be compatible.
Cool. Okay.
And I do think in the decision to adopt fast, there's still a lot of details to work out. I think there's a number of different ways that we can leverage fast, from using the built-in components to building our own components with the underlying framework, so that I don't think we've worked through all the details, or at least I'm not aware of if we've worked through all those details yet.
I mean, one approach, of course, would be just to have shims for specific libraries, so that they present interfaces that are similar to whatever the built-in UI library presents.
You talked about snack bar, is that right?
Snack bar, yeah.
Cool.
It's like fairly lightweight. It's like these cute little rectangles in the corner. There's a optional plugin to stack them if you really want to be able to receive multiple.
So that is a fast component, right?
As far as I know,
there's
none.
Wait,
there's
so
a feature UI component.
No, what is this that I just linked in the chat?
If it just exists, then it's all where it's from.
I mean, maybe it's just called fast UI and it's not.
Wait, hang on.
Yeah,
this
it's
is
not related. Yeah.
That is so annoying. Okay, got it.
What's the actual website for the actual thing?
Fast.design.
Yeah.
Okay.
Because there are fast design is using web components, so it's quite easy when you look at the DOM.
So I opened a GitHub issue about all this. And I'll post further details as I turn them up.
And I concur with Max. It's probably gonna be not so easy to implement. Like the logic of handling those notifications can be very tricky.
Formatting for it too. Get it to float it like in the corner, exactly how you want.
Another dimension of this that's come up in the notification work is that when you add real-time collaboration, notifications become much more complex than we had ever imagined. And so
there's still going to be two classes of notifications, even in that environment, where there'll be some things that you just notify the individual user about, and some things you notify in a sync way. So the individual one should still be at least reasonably simple, I think.
Well, so Max, even in that case, there's the question of what happens if another. So a great example of this is if the server does something while you have the UI closed, and next time you log in, like open the UI, you should be notified. And again, it's just you and the server, no multiple people. And so even in that case, we're using this new event bus and Jupyter server to track and distribute these messages and cache them and make sure that the right people get them at the right time.
Okay, because the RTC data model can actually support that kind of thing. I see.
And a lot of this actually is the event bus, not RTC, that's been designed with this and a couple other use cases in mind. And so I realized that there is a world where toast notifications are simple. I think JupyterLab is no longer in that space.
So I think what you're talking about, Brian, is different things that can produce notifications, right? But which is a separate thing that from a extension or token that produces a way of displaying notifications, right?
Yes, but and the other, so the other absolutely.
What would be wrong with the extension or token that could produce notifications?
So the other part of this that we have been working a lot on is ensuring that the user experience overall is good. So for example, having some notion of notification types that a user can dismiss. So don't show me these notifications again. Again, there's a lot of outstanding questions here. I just want to make sure we're all the people who want to work on this work together on this. That's my main, yeah.
So should Max's new issue or the original 600 issue be the one where the discussion happens? But I think we need an area where everybody can discuss this, right?
Darian, you may know a more up-to-date place where some of these discussions are happening.
Not really, because right now we've been so focused on the server side of things, of building what the event bus is and the JupyterLab API connectivity side, that we haven't actually focused or refocused on the notifications UI yet. So there isn't a central repository for a conversation about something like this right now.
Oh, so the current issue is fine then, I think.
Quick clarifying question, just for my own sanity. My understanding of what Max was proposing was solely UI, essentially to give us a way to trigger toast notifications. Yeah. What triggers them and how those get triggered can be vastly varied and could be leveraged by this new notification system. But my understanding was just the goal was just to add the ability to pop up toast notifications in JupyterLab natively and have them look good. Is that kind of what you were getting at, Max, or were you actually?
That encapsulates my minimum goals pretty succinctly.
Yeah. So the idea is, even no matter how these are used in the future by this notification system, just adding the ability to cleanly visualize toast notifications in JupyterLab is just a really good add. Like we can discuss how we want it to plug into the notification system after it's been implemented.
Well, I totally agree with. All right, go ahead.
Thanks, Brian. So these words are ambiguous in this context, but from the way we've been talking about it as the implementers of some of these things, we separate events, which are server things that happen, occurrences, right? That lots of stuff might happen. You might be subscribing to events as like a CLI application or whatever. You not even have a visual component, versus notifications, which are things end users see and manifest in toast pop-ups and manifest in a notification center, which is a sidebar panel. And so the JupyterLab notifications extension that the Cal Poly team built last year does have a toast notifications, and it uses this library that I linked above that comes from JupyterLab Contrib, and I believe Fred authored. So there is an actual toast UI in that extension, and there's a toast library that it uses that it's specifically intended for being in.
I mean, I'm fine with just cleaning it up and bringing it in.
Yeah, I mean, that sounds sound, right? We would like to have notifications in JupyterLab 4. So
they will not be, I looked at them, they're not quite as pretty as the Material UI ones, I would say, but they're fine.
Yeah,
they do stack, which is nice.
And I do, so I agree there is a bit of separation of concerns there. I think the intersection point is the data and event model that the UI consumes. And then there's a question of, is there a layer between the posting of the notification and the showing of the notification that filter, like if the users dismiss those, don't show those, even though an extension's trying to post it.
Sure. It's minimized by toast having a limited lifespan. They're only ever on screen for 10 seconds. So I think these are things that could be addressed at the very least in separate PRs, if not in sort of separate thought processes.
Yeah, let's continue discussion on the issue.
Sounds good.
Cool. Thanks for bringing this up, Max. And yeah, this is, I mean, at the end of the day, one way or another, we want the functionality. Let's just figure out what that looks like.
Yeah, that sounds good to me.
Cool. So we had the save conversation as well, but is there some piece of it that was left unsaid, or should we move on? Okay. So I opened an issue in the Team Compass, and it's linked. I'll put it in the chat as well. And it was about how long the voting period should be for the times we actually do vote. So I think we've had 3 votes so far, not counting nominations to the JupyterLab Council. The default language of the decision-making guide in the Jupyter governance repo is that votes take 7 days. And this is a question asking, is 7 days sufficient? And I personally don't actually have a strong inclination here, but I know that there are people who ask for it to be longer, and there are people who believe actually 7 days is good because otherwise we might get bogged down. So if you have an opinion and you want to express it now, that's cool. If you want to express it in the issue, that's also cool. If it turns out that we want to do something different than what is currently happening, then we can see if we have consensus on that and just do it. And if we don't, then we can see if we should put it to a vote. Now, there is one option that's outside of just JupyterLab, which is modifying the Jupyter-wide decision-making guide. I personally am kind of disinclined to do that because different projects are different, and they all sort of either will be satisfied with the default 7-day period or will have to have their own conversation. But because I don't really have a position to advocate for, I'll give a second for others to chime in, or we can move on.
I could try to verbalize something I've been thinking about. So I've kind of mixed on this based on a lot of people's comments in that PR. I feel like there's really solid reasons for and against it. I agree. I don't think we should be changing it Jupyter wide. I think if we do anything, it would be JupyterLab only. 7 days should normally be enough, but there's always going to be circumstances which could change that. And I feel like one of the biggest ones that we've run into is discussion, where it's brought to a vote, but the majority of the people who are voting haven't actually looked at it yet and don't know what the discussion points are yet. And so for them, the vote is triggering their discussion and rather than them voting. So it might be worth delaying votes and having a discussion period before votes, and then just leaving the 7 days, because that gives us that flexibility we need to look into it, but without the overhead of actually extending the vote itself. Because if it was just voting, I feel like 7 days is fine. But if it's research, analysis, discussion, and voting, I'd say 7 days is almost never enough.
Yeah, so the way the governance or the way the decision-making guide is written is that decisions are made through two phases, where the first phase is required, the second is optional. The first phase is just consensus. And if some project can reach consensus, no votes are needed. A vote is typically called when consensus blocks. What's interesting about some of the recent votes in pertaining to real-time collaboration is that I think the people working on it were blocked in their consensus. So it was reasonable to create a vote, but then further discussion was triggered. And actually the voting guide explicitly says votes should not be taken or proposed in a way to sort of short circuit discussion or silence discussion, any of that. I think the real-time collaboration one would be a great case where it would have made sense to just ad hoc extend the voting period because there was more discussion than we had expected.
Vidar.
Yeah, so as far as I understand things in JupyterLab here, the times where you get a vote, as Brian said, is when consensus breaks down, right? So if that happens, it means it's something contentious is going on, right? And ideally these should be rare occurrences. Well, hopefully there will be rare occurrences, right? So if we only need to make a decision, like a quick decision for, should we bring in this other repo into the org, right? That happens from time to time on the Team Compass. Those things have happened. Those will normally go by consensus, right? You won't actually have to have a formal vote on it. So those will still be able to be short and quick and whatever, and you won't have a huge thing there. So if we actually have a vote, if somebody has a strong opinion and they're on vacation, that's, if they're going for a month, it's their responsibility to check in. But if you're gone for a week, I think, it's maybe those things can happen. Yeah. If somebody calls a vote and nobody should call a vote in 20th of December, right? Most people will be gone, right? So
no,
it's I mean, the rules are there as guidelines, right? The current one says that 7 days is the default, and then you can, or the minimum, whatever, right? You can have longers.
Well, no, the rules are there to cap how long a vote takes, but the whole thing is predicated on people acting in good faith and not waiting until no one's looking to sneak something in. Like the legitimacy comes because we trust each other, not because we voted, right? All right, well, because we only have 5 minutes left and there is another thing, I would suggest carrying on the conversation in the thread. Who wanted to make the report from SciPy, and should I stop the recording before you do it or after?
Jason wrote the SciPy point.
All right, then, in which case I'm going to stop the recording and you can read what he wrote.